So our boss wants to find out who had the lowest amount due on outstanding invoices. So to answer that question, we're going to need to use the AP database and the invoices table. And we're also going to have to use the min function to retrieve the lowest amount. So I already created a new query. And I'm going to put a little comment in here for task number 1. And so first thing I need to do is tell it to use the AP database. And then I'm going to put in my select. And to find out who had the lowest amount due, I need to take the invoice total minus the payment total minus the credit total, and I need to get the minimum of that. So I'm going to do min, and then in parentheses it's going to be invoice total minus payment total minus credit total. And then I'm going to give this an alias. So I'm going to say as minimum due. And as soon as I enter the table I'm getting this from, those little red squiggles are going to go away. So I'm going to say from invoices. And then I really only want to look at invoices that have a balance greater than 0. So I'm going to say where the invoice total minus the payment total minus the credit total is greater than 0. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And it's bringing me back the figure for the minimum amount due. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to call it Chapter 5. At Spelling Night textbook assignment. And I'm going to throw that up in documents. And I'm going to go ahead and pull my comment down here. And I'm going to click below. And the next thing our boss would like to know is they want to know which item has the lowest unit price. So to answer their question, we're going to be using the product orders database and the items table. So we're going to say use product orders. And we're going to do select min. And we want the minimum unit price. And we'll give that a little alias of minimum unit price. And we're getting this from the items table. And we'll go ahead and run that. And that looks correct, so I'm going to go ahead and move my closing comment down. And we're moving on to task 2. I'm going to move my closing comment past that. So now our boss wants the maximum and minimum invoice amount due. So they want the minimum, which we already have up here. Okay, and so basically we can take this and copy that whole thing. And we're going to add to it. So they wanted the minimum, and they also want the maximum. So the maximum is going to be very similar to the minimum. So I'm going to copy the minimum. We'll paste it on the line below. And then I'm going to change min to max. And I'm going to change the alias to maximum do. And then I do need to put a comma in between. So this is going to give me the minimum, basically the balance, and this is going to give me the maximum. And I'm going to go ahead and execute this. So this is the same minimum we saw before, and now we're also getting the maximum. We will go ahead and move our closing comment down. So now our boss wants a listing of the highest sales and the lowest sales. And this is not unusual in business. These are kind of exception reporting type things, and they quite often want to know who has the most and who has the least. So we are going to be using the examples database. And what we're going to be looking at for columns is the sales total. So we're going to say select max sales total. And we'll give that an alias of highest sales. Comma in, and then we want the minimum of the sales. Well, and we're going to give that an alias of lowest sales. And this is coming from the sales totals table. And we'll go ahead and run this. And now we should see the highest and lowest sales. And we'll move our comment down. And we're moving on to task 3, which deals with the count function. So we'll just give this a little label. We'll move our comment down. So the count function does exactly what you would assume. It just counts the number of occurrences. Max brings back the highest and min brings back the lowest. So our boss wants to know how many customers live in Illinois. So we're going to be using our examples database and our customers table with the count function. So we're going to say use examples. And we're going to have a select. Now, if the red squiggles bother you, you can enter the from customers first. And then if you go up to your select, you won't get any of those squiggles. And what we want to count is the customer ID. And so if you're wondering where all of this comes from, if we look over under examples and we look at tables, and we take a look at customers, the ID is the key. And if you wanted to know the total number of customers, it makes sense to count the primary key because it's required. Okay, so we're going to be counting up the primary key. We're going to give this an alias of Illinois customers. And then we do need to add a where to this, because the boss only wants to see the number of people in Illinois. So we're going to say where. And if you look over here, you can see cust state is the column name, where cust state equals IL. And we're going to go ahead and run it. So we have 3, and that is what we would tell them. And we'll go ahead and move our closing comment down. And next, our boss wants to know which vendor's name is last in the list and which one is first in the list, and how many vendors do we even have? All right, so we're going to have to use min to get the first and max to get the last. And you can use min and max on alphabetic columns. And then we're going to have to do a count. And we're going to be using the AP database. And before I do my select, I'm just going to throw in from vendors so that when I do the select, I don't have to see the little squiggles. So they wanted to know which vendor's name. So if we come up here to AP, and we take a look at vendors. Okay, so vendor name is our column. They want to know which one is first and last. So we're going to do min, and we're looking at vendor name. And we'll just give that an alias of first vendor. Put in a comma. Then we're going to do a max on vendor name. And we'll give that an alias of last vendor. And then we're going to do a count. And we'll go ahead and count vendor name as, going to give it an alias of number of vendors. Now, would we have to count name? Could we count ID instead? Yeah, we could. So if you want to do vendor ID, that's fine, but it should be the same. Vendor ID is a primary key, so it cannot be null. But you'll notice vendor name also cannot be null. So both should be filled in every row. So we're using vendor name, and it should have the same results as vendor ID. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And so you can see the first and the last vendor and the total number of vendors that we have in the table. So we'll go ahead and move our closing comment down. Now the boss would like to know, well, now that we know how many customer or vendors we have, how many customers do we have? So we're going to be using the examples database. And we're basically going to count everything. So this is going to be a little different. What we're going to do, instead of specifying a column, we're just going to say count. And in parentheses, we're going to give it an asterisk. So that just says count it all. And we're going to give it an alias of all customers. And this is all coming from the customers table. So we'll go ahead and run. And we have a whopping 24 customers. We'll move our closing comment down. And our boss would like to know how many investors we have, what the maximum net gain is, and basically what the minimum net gain is. So we're going to have to look at the investors table, which is located in the examples database. So if we come down to examples and we take a look at investors, we can see what the column names are. And we're going to tell it use examples. Oops, I think I need an S. And then we're going to do our select. And we know we need to do a count. And they want to know how many investors we have. We're going to count up investor ID. Okay, then what is the maximum net gain? And let's see, we do want to give this an alias. So we'll say as. Now, when you give it an alias, if there's spaces, you either have to put it in single quotes or you can put it in brackets. What I have discovered is that SSMS sometimes does not like single quotes, but it never has a problem with the brackets. Okay, so if you ever try putting single quotes around an alias and it still is flagging it as an error, put it in brackets and it should work. Okay, so we've got account of investor ID. We're going to put a little heading on that of number of investors. Then we need to know what the maximum net gain is. So we're going to say max. And then if you look over, we do have a net gain column. And we're going to give that an alias. And just so we can get used to doing brackets or aliases with spaces, we're going to say max net gain. A little comma after that. And then they also want to know the minimum net gain. So we'll say min net gain. And we'll give that a little alias in brackets. And we'll just say min net gain with spaces. And this is all coming from investors. And we'll go ahead and execute. So yeah, this is bad. A negative net gain means we lost some money. The positive one is pretty good, negative not so good, but this is the information that we would be giving our boss. And at this point, we are done with the task and we are moving on to the next one. So this should be task 4. I'm going to move that closing comment down. So with this task, we're going to be practicing with the average function. And basically, it's just going to average values in whatever column we give it. And what our boss would like us to do is adjust our last query to include the average net gain. So this is actually going to be a really easy one because we're going to just copy, Control C, Control V. I'm going to copy paste, and then I'm going to put a little comma on the end here, and I'm going to say AVG net gain. And then we'll do as, and we'll call it average gain. And then we'll go ahead and run it. Okay, so it's showing the biggest gain, the negative gain, and then what our average is.